Welcome to Regen360. More than ever, we need to step it up to regenerate the health of the planet and all living things. We exist to help educate, inspire, and accelerate transformational action. Here's your host, David Gottfried.
Hi, it's David Gottfried, and I'm so excited to be here today for this Regen360 podcast interview with Paul Hawken. Paul Hawken is one of the greatest thinkers in the world. He has this unique ability to not only understand sustainability, but go much further, and now is teaching us about regeneration in his new book. I encourage you to grab a copy because this book is looking at regeneration, not just of the planet and its ecosystems and its the species and humans, but also of our spirit. He is getting to the essence of value and wealth so that when we create wealth of the future, it's consistent with life and life sustaining. This book is such a deep read, but it's also enthusiastic, inspiring, and pragmatic. And at the end, Paul encourages us to create our own regeneration plans. So I think you'll enjoy this in-depth and unique opportunity to dialogue about regeneration with Paul. And I hope you'll enjoy our interview. So Paul, awesome to have you here today. We've been friends for a long time. You've inspired me and our world. And you have a huge book here for us to go through on regeneration. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you so much. It's really nice to be with you, to talk with you. We have known each other a long time and we've met in unusual places. I mean, not unusual in the sense that, but they were far away from our home. And then there you were, and there I was, and then there's David, and there's Paul, and we were doing the same thing really, which is trying to drum up understanding about, at that time, I think the common word was sustainability, but not a word I'm in love with then or now. But it's great to see you.
Yeah, so you wrote a brilliant, beautiful book. I had such a great time going through it, and I'd love to share it with our listeners here and pull out the essence to help accelerate. That's really my focus these days, and yours too, is acceleration. I always say of transformation, but deliberately you called it regeneration. And just as you spoke a little bit, this is different than sustainability. It's different than getting to net zero and being a climate advocate. Tell us why that title and what regeneration means to you in the book, Paul.
I defined regeneration in the first sentence as putting life at the center of every act and decision. So, there you go. And regeneration is there, as you can see, it's regeneration. So, ending the climate crisis in one generation. So there is that interplay between the word regeneration, which is innate to life and innate to human beings, innate to who we are. And then there is the climate crisis itself, which is time delimited in terms of our ability to respond to it in an effective way, And then lastly, there's a new generation, as there always is, but I mean a generation that is inherited a planetary situation that they didn't create, and are affected and impacted greatly psychologically in terms of feeling depressed or worried or anxious, confused, and not happy about, sort of waking up as an adolescent or, 18-year-old and going, wow, the world's on fire and getting worse. So the title is meant to touch on all those different aspects. But the main thing is that it's meant to call for a pivot, and a pivot doesn't mean to gainsay anything that's going on with respect to addressing global warming. I praise all efforts and people and organizations that are doing whatever they can. So it's not meant to say, listen, I got a better way. Not at all. But I think what we need is a bigger way, not a better way. And what I mean by bigger, something that's broader, more engaging, more encompassing, more inclusive, something that most people want to get involved with and do. And right now, 98 to 99% of humanity is disengaged from doing anything at all. And you have to say, well, God, I mean, that's amazing. Here we are facing the worst crisis civilization has ever faced and may ever, for that matter, and the vast number of people on the world are not doing anything about it at all. So rather than point fingers at them and blame them, or shame them, we have to think, well, what did we all do collectively? And I think to create that, and I think it had very much to do with the positioning, the languaging of it, what we have been basically didactically and declaratively saying about, what the situation is. And basically it's made people numb. It's turned them off. So even though maybe half of those people who are disengaged are empathetic or sympathetic and understand the basic dynamics of global warming, they too are doing nothing. And they think they're doing something because they're sympathetic, or they watch a documentary on Netflix or something and they feel or they take out the recycling every, Thursday morning, and do these sort of little things, little gestures, which not to be discounted, but cumulatively have a very, very little impact on the situation at hand. Yeah.
So how do we get to their heart and soul? How do we make regeneration the core of their activities? How do we not have this boring, or I gave $50 to Sierra Club? This is really about life sustaining, certainly the future way beyond us. And yet the economy somewhat turning, but we're not in the game. It's not, and we're distant. We don't necessarily even see climate change or Earth as home. Why are we so disengaged, disfranchised? We're not empowered. How can we get off the sidelines and make this part of our everyday life?
Well, a bunch of ways. One is we can communicate it differently. That's number one. And we're communicating it in a way that others it. Bill Gates says we're going to fix it, quote, quote, it. What's it? There is no it there. And second, it's very male. We're going to fix it. That's what men like to do. They like to fix things. They break things pretty well too, of course. So that's why they have to fix them. And so there is this techno-optimism about, okay, technology is causing it. Technology can fix it, which is technology often causes new problems every time it tries to correct an old problem.
Right.
And then there is this rhetoric about fighting, combating, tackling, climate change. Well, let's just parse that for a minute. First of all, those warlike terms are very male again, what men like to talk about it. And so that infuses our language, and when you fight, tackle, combat something, it's something apart from you. It's something else, again, like it's in it. And actually, there is no it there. The climate and the atmosphere and the biosphere are actually one system. And so when we do that, in a sense, we separate ourselves from nature, from the earth, from systems, from responsibility even. And that is sort of, tragic, because that creates, in a sense, some of the ennui and the sense of, existential loneliness and isolation and hyper individuality. It just really reifies that, instead of seeing us, intimately connected to the biosphere and the atmosphere. And those are just words. Climate, atmosphere, biosphere, those are words, interesting distinctions, but in actuality, in real life, there's no demarcation, there's no line between those at all. And so that language is, when you combine it with the scientific knowledge and predictions, about what's going to happen and the impacts already that we're experiencing, which are called future existential threat and fear, and you combine that with activism voices, which I agree with, but then they often shame and blame and create guilt, and about institutions that are screwing the pooch, which is our banking industry, Wall Street, et cetera, and then so the individual is going like a fear, threat, guilt, shame, blame. It's like, whoa, where's my it's not a big invitation. It's not a kind invitation. Like, come on in, you can blame others with us. And it's not to say, I'm not saying what activists are doing, or NGOs or institutions or many companies, they're doing amazing things. And I'm just extraordinarily grateful and in appreciation of that. But I'm just saying overall, that's what most people read, hear, and see, is that kind of thing. And then the next thing is on the economy. If you really look at what most economists, but certainly the business world is saying, is that there's this sort of tacit understanding, which I don't agree with, that if we just sort of get it right, if we can just swap out fossil fuels with renewable energy, and that's 80% of emissions and so forth, and just a few other things, we can sort of solve the problem. We can quote quote fix it, and that's just not true at all.
Right.
And that's imperative that we do those things. So it's paradoxical. We must do those things, but the idea that somehow if we do that, that solves the problem. And what that does is it creates this polarization within people, because on one hand, for years, you've been told this is what you can do, like Uncle Sam, recycle and do this and use cold water, in your washing machine, and, drive less and eat smart. And the Union of Concerned Scientists put out a list of top solutions, and one of them was put a power strip in your home entertainment center. I'm not kidding. And you're going, I don't have a home entertainment center, so where should I put my power strip? It's like, and the thing is, we're not stupid. Individuals will see this list and things and go, nod, yeah, I can get that. Those would be good things to do. They're appropriate. They're right. They reduce my impact. But those are insufficient to the task at hand. And so then what happens is, we as individuals, we look to big institutions, big corporations, big government, the conference of the parties, and we go, come on, yeah, it's they. There's a they there somewhere that's going to do it
for us,
Solve it. And because we know that what we do is de minimis, and what they can do is huge in terms of regulations and subsidies or taxation or pricing or whatever. And what's left out is everything in between. And that's what regeneration tries to address, which is it's middle out. It's not top down. It's not bottom up. It is right there in the middle, where the blessings, the offerings, the interest, the engagement, and where people can get engaged in activity that addresses global warming, but in fact, the activities are innately beneficial themselves and have benefits to the people creating them, to sharing them, to enacting them, to producing them, whatever verb you want to use. And so they're innately beneficial and regenerating to us as people. In other words, regenerates our lives and our sense of purpose and meaning. And that's what regeneration is about, is like somehow, we're missing the message here. The message is that we're screwed if we don't do this. Well, I don't argue that on a scientific basis, but I argue that on a motivational basis. It doesn't motivate.
So it's this whole struggle Yes, we have existential problems, but it's hard to feel it. We look to these big systems to solve it. And then we go on with our lives. Maybe we do a few small things, but it's almost, it's this tension of my life, my home, my family, my job versus other. And it's this dialogue of, are we part of nature or not? Are we biospheres, atmosphere, is that ours? Or is it outside? It's this whole tension of outside. It's even interesting if we go even more inside to our brains. You've got, and we talked about male versus female, and that hot amygdala, which is more male. Let's fight, let's conquer, let's kill, let's extract, let's win, put food on the table. But and the female is more, let's work together, let's have yin instead of the yang, let's together be stronger, the network effect. But there's still that tension of nature, and are we part of nature, or do we conquer nature?
For sure.
So I want to get into that other, are we part of nature, our brains, to try to get us in this game of regeneration more.
For sure. I mean, we are colonists. We are white people. We're from Europe primarily. I'm talking about white people right now, and we have been dominant, and we're the colonizers, the settlers, and what we did to the world was basically rape it and take it, and horrific acts of genocide. I'm not laughing. I'm just like, somehow that penny's not fully dropped. We don't really still realize the overwhelmingly pervasive and enduring impacts and effects of that. And the mindset was an othering mindset from the papal decrees of the doctrine of discovery. If you sailed off from Portugal to Spain and found a new land and you put a flag there, that there was your land. And all the people there were subjugated to your rule, but to the king of whichever country you came from. And that came from the Pope and the Rome and Vatican and so forth. That doctrine of discovery has never been repealed. It still exists to this day. And so this is the result. And the other part of the result, though, is that we're being homeschooled by the planet. And so what we're starting to experience more and more, instead of conceptually like, oh, climate change, global warming, that's a concept. What we're experiencing is the impacts more and more directly or vicariously. And so there is a really shift going on right now saying, oh my gosh, what those people were talking about back then was actually true. And it does affect me and my family, my farm, my city, my home, my whatever. And my lungs, in terms of inhaling smoke. And so we're in that point, and that point of that inflection point is still relatively small, but it's certainly growing. It's growing because of feedback, and we know on a systemic basis, any system that ignores feedback dies, perishes, is gone. So our bodies give us feedback every single day, and if we really are sensitive every hour, we're feeling, we're sensing, but certainly overall. And so the planet is no different, and nature never makes a mistake. This idea that something's wrong out there, it's not wrong. This sounds paradoxical, but the climate is perfect. It couldn't be any other than absolutely perfect, because it's absolutely an expression of the biosphere. And so how could it be imperfect? And so it is adjusting and changing according to what we are doing. So nature never makes a mistake. We do, in the sense that we have become profoundly out of alignment with nature, and we're not part of nature. We are nature. And so when you look at the language and the tenets and the cosmology of the 5,000 indigenous cultures, in the world, like the Ashwara, they don't have a word for nature. They don't even have the separation in the language itself to then say, oh, we're not separate. As soon as you say we're not separate from nature, you just did it. You know,
Well,
that's the nature of the English language and so forth. You know, and our and so I'm not decrying that. That's the language we know and so forth. But that understanding of place, of nature, of being nature, as opposed to being in nature and so forth, was innate in the way they live. And the reason indigenous people have so much to teach and share that we've overlooked and so forth is because they stayed in the same place for 2, 3, 4, 5, 10,000 and more years. And if anybody knows what's going on in that place, it would be those people who lived there for that long.
I love the foreword that Jane Goodall wrote for your book, Regeneration. And she says what separates us from other living and non-living is this, she calls it the explosive development of our intellect. And yet our intellect doesn't yet understand nature as you describe. It doesn't understand the dashboard of nature and reading all that until the fire's coming right at our house, or we can't get the seafood anymore where we used to fish because we've overfished, or we got the flood hit us hard. And yet we built, you said colonialism, and then we built an economy that's extractive, and our whole definition of value and wealth is just, where's nature in that equation? It's not a full equation, it's impartial. And the variables it missed are the externalities.
Absolutely. Well, I mean, two things. One is I would question the word intellect because that implies that there's greater intellectual understanding amongst colonists, and I radically disagree with that. We have different ways of understanding intelligence. So, you know, and the example I give is the Mi'kmaq First Nations in Nova Scotia, and they can go by a spruce tree and listen to the soughing of the wind through the tree. There's a sound it makes. That tree makes a sound. They name the tree by the sound it's making. Right? Like each tree is different. Get out of here. And they can go to that tree 10 years later. They'll remember the name and they'll listen to the sound. And if the sound isn't the same as the name, they know the tree has been damaged or changed in some way. Now, what do we call that? So look at the song lines. The Aboriginal, which have been treated as, you know, just the name itself is, you know, they're somehow other, you know, Aboriginal, right? And, you know, I mean, the song lines are these songs they sang on these sort of migratory routes, lines of path and travel and so forth. And those songs change all the time, and they are embedded with scientific knowledge of that place, how to be there, how to take care of it, how to take care of it in such a way that the next people who will travel there are taken care of. And you know what to do if you're hungry. Don't eat those berries unless you're really hungry, and if you are, then cook them in this way, but don't eat them for too long. I mean, it was very, very detailed, and these songs changed over 50,000 years. Come on, what is that? I mean, that is an exquisite understanding of place in a sere environment. It's very difficult to survive it, and did very, very well for a very long time. And so we have to, you know, sort of back off a little bit. We're smart, yeah, and there's so much we don't understand and we don't perceive because we were all subject to what I would call an industrial education.
Beyond, I agree, but it's beyond the education and these systems, there's still the struggle. It's almost like the survival wiring we got, you know, 20,000 years ago to outrun something who's going to kill us or get the food or the shelter. no longer serves us. We can go, some of us can go to the supermarket and shop. Some of us, the fortunate, have the shelter, the clothing, but yet we're at war all the time and we don't even know it. We don't know this extraction. Like in your book, you talk about all the species we've killed. It's just, I'm still struggling. And I guess the ego starts to come in. And that's male, maybe more. I know there's female, but just being better, bigger, more, this idea that growth is success and this endless hunger. And I think to really shift, we gotta get into psychology and emotion and even the brains and even plasticity to lay new wiring, to hear that wind through the tree and know that that's important.
Well, and I mean, the major distinction we're talking about here is people who think they're individuals. And then what the culture does is the advertising, social media, now even more so, it's amplifying and so forth, is to reify that identity over and over and over. And that then makes the person feel vulnerable because they have to, take, save, invest, get, whatever because if they don't, then no one else will take care of them. And so you're on your own. Good luck. Go for it. And that compulsive, education thing. I got to get more degrees. I got to get this. I got that. I got to strive. I got to do that. And underneath that, it's just human need too. Which is for, socialization, children and family and community. But overlaid on that top is an extractive sense of being. And so when one of the people in the book is Hindu Umaru Ibrahim, who is a Chadian pastoralist. And her mother did something that was ridiculed by her co-pastoralist, which is to educate her daughter. And Hindu is brilliant, and she knows geospatial mapping, and she uses satellites and laptops and out there in the middle of nowhere to really work with the other pastoralists about the timing. They travel 1,000 kilometers a year, north to south and south to north, and about when to go where and the water and this and how to do it in such a way that is actually regenerative instead of degenerative. Okay, and what she says is that the way they think in their culture, is that they think 7 generations ahead. Okay, we've heard that before. Okay, I mean, unfortunately, there's even a 7th generation toilet paper, which is ridiculous. Sorry, a name. Talk about colonization. I mean, there's
using it as a brand for marketing.
Yeah, it's a horrible brand in that sense because it doesn't really honor. But what she says, which is so important, she said, we thought 7 generations ahead because we knew what happened 7 generations before. We know, we remember, we have that knowledge. So now you look at what's the individual, that is, the individual is part of a continuity as opposed to a discontinuity. And our lives are riddled with discontinuity. And so we don't have that, So that she's an individual, okay, as her, fellow pastoralists are, but their identity is so different, than the one that we are educated and born into and then respond to. And so I think that what regeneration offers is something that is what I think is a hunger for all of us, which is to feel that we actually are capable of engaging in ways that actually make a substantial difference. And the key to that is to know that being an individual is a delusion. There's no such thing. And we are part of complex networks, our family, our neighborhood, our friends, our community, our clubs, our churches, our synagogues, our temples, our cities, our companies. I mean, I can go on. And you this is who you are, all those and more, and the people you know and respect and vice versa, and the people you're engaged with and so forth. This is where you can make a difference, because initiatives start with one person, but a person becomes a dyad, and there's two people, you're talking to somebody, maybe it's your wife, maybe it's your son, maybe it's a neighbor, maybe it's a coworker, whatever, and then two becomes four. I mean, the dream of every cell, and we're made of cells, 30 trillion cells, is to what? The dream of every cell is to become two cells. that's what every cell wants to do. And we are nature.
And
That's
live.
yeah, and we are those. Um, we are Homo sapiens. We're not Neanderthals. We have a little bit of blood in some of us, but Homo sapiens actually socialize. They cooperate. They learn together, and they solve problems together. We're still those same people, and we're good at it. But if we're not good at it, if we don't understand the problem, if we don't understand basically where our agency lies, and agency is just primary to solving and addressing global warming, because if we just think of ourselves as individual, or we think the Conference of the Parties is going to do something after 25 years, then we feel despair because we know that's not enough. It won't happen.
You write about the collective, which is made up of these individuals, but the collective can create the network compounding change that we need. You can't do it on your own. And yet we're not all in the game. And that's really the key. Here we have COP26 coming up in November in Glasgow, and some of us know about it, not that many. We somehow think that, they'll advance the Paris Agreement and make it happen. We had a good news this week. The UK upped its amount of emissions reduction they'll do by 2035 to 78%. But those are still numbers. Those are other countries. Those are global events. We're not there. How do we bring it home? And I know in your book, at the end, you have this really nice, you talk about a climate checklist and a personal commitment punch list. It's starting to take the regeneration home. What can you do when we get off of this podcast and you read the book? How do you carry it forward so you are that point or that individual connection in the collective? And then, as you say, it's actions that inspire beliefs. So what can the listeners do right now? What can they do when this podcast is over? What can they do tomorrow?
Well, let me go back a little ways there, which is that you talk about the Paris Agreement and so forth. I mean, the fact is that jargon, acronyms, metrics mean nothing to most people. That's a really ridiculous way to communicate. And if you doubt that, I mean, then just go down and do a person, man in the street interview and talk to person after person and say, what does 1.5C mean to you? And if you find somebody who understands it, it means you're near a university. I mean, and it means nothing. And so we're talking in garble. Now, of course, when two doctors are talking to each other about a patient, they go right to jargon and scientific terminology and metrics, and right away, boom. It's very effective. One doctor to another, totally ineffective talking to the patient, right? And so we talk about bedside manner. The climate movement doesn't have bedside manner. It has terrible bedside manner and expects people to actually make sense of that. They're not going to. They don't have time for that. And so we have to step back and say, wait a minute, why, how could you have such a tin ear to the world, to the human need and so forth? So the way I look at it is this: if we look, what we have is not just a punch list. What we have is Nexus in the website. Nexus is not complete yet, but it is the world's largest listing and network of climate solutions and how to do them. Drawdown in the previous book wasn't about how to do them, is what could be done. Okay, good idea. We didn't know. Drawdown came out. It's in 18 countries and I don't know how many, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of copies, and people use it. It's being taught. But the question comes up again and again, which is your question: what can I do? Or and my answer to that question is, I have no idea what you should do, because I don't know you. But I can tell you this: if you look at that list of challenges and solutions, what happens, you will find what you want to do, what you care to do, what really lights you up. That's what you should do. And you can be sure that you'll be doing something, other people will be doing other things. You don't have to do everything. You have to do and engage in something that actually brings you to life. Because when you bring the earth to life, you bring yourself to life. When you bring your environment to life, you're bringing yourself back to life. But it could be in the built environment. It could be in an inner city. It could be, it could be education, how itself, or the school itself, for that matter. I mean,
Right.
what we're being educated in, what environment. But it also could be forests, it can be wetlands, it can be species, it can be ocean acidification, it can be marine protected areas, it can be fire ecology. I mean, it goes on and on and on. And what you see in these solutions, David, is that if there was no conference of the parties and no climate scientist was alive, and we were clueless as to extreme weather, and Hurricane Ida was just a bummer, basically. Ooh, that was a really tough one. And we didn't have any idea that it was amplified by warming in the equatorial regions, and so forth. We would want to do every one of these solutions because they have cascading benefits for human beings now. For those who we call poor, they're not poor, they're living in poverty conditions, they're not poor people, that's a misnomer, and everyone else, and that the benefits are immediate, they're now, they address current human needs, and they create better jobs, they create work and livelihoods that give meaning and dignity and purpose to meaning. They create a future for our children, pure water, better food, nutrient density, education, a healthcare system that's not a sick care system. I mean, I can go on and on. That's what's available to us. And that's what I say, we're being homeschooled. Is like, the lesson plan number one is to get in alignment with biology. And that's what these solutions do. They're in alignment with the living world. Practically, though, and this in terms of carbon architecture. In other words, the
Right.
advances have been made in the built environment, from, lead silver, to actually making buildings that actually sequester carbon. I mean, that's the progression, the architecture progression in the last, 30 plus years. It's amazing. And
Right.
so that's regeneration, because people need to have
Just the embodied energy, waking up to that. It's not
Yes,
just operational, it's
right.
embodied.
Yeah, buildings
You're
are
even
40%.
talking about embodied life and
Right.
life sustaining.
Yeah. And so the opportunity we have is, the thing about degeneration. Every economic sector is degenerative. It takes life. When you look at the supply chain, it takes life. That is degeneration. But the difference now is that we can see the end of that road. We've been doing this for a long time. We now look down the road of degeneration, and go, whoa, it's dead ends. Yeah, it's a dead end. It's a cul-de-sac. It doesn't go much further. So we have that opportunity right now to say, wow, we need to pivot 180. And what is that pivot? To regeneration. That is an economy that stops stealing the future. Because that's what we're doing. We're just stealing it, monetizing it, and call it capital, and reinvesting it, right? And an economy that actually heals the future. That is to create some more life. That economy that's like a keystone economy. People and groups and companies are like keystone species. And what a keystone species does is make more life inherently in the way it lives. It doesn't do it altruistically. It just lives in such a way that there is more life. And whether it's a hummingbird, bee, a wolf, or a beaver, and many more keystone species, human beings were once keystone species. We call them indigenous. How interesting. And that is what they did. And there is a wealth of information, knowledge, wisdom there, much of it lost because of how they've been treated and deracinated, poisoned, killed, genocided. But
Enslaved.
there still is that wisdom there. It's on earth. It's 5,000 cultures, you know. And so there's this treasure there about a teaching for us to say, what does it mean to heal the future? And we're bright. We have intellects. well educated. So you combine that with that inherent wisdom and you have regeneration.
But implicit is this awakening, and that we're relatively new here. And we went from indigenous and listening for generations to depletive. And now we have to wake up and rebuild all systems back to those that respect life and then life sustaining. And that is wealth and value. That's the billionaire of the future.
Right.
It's the person who creates oxygen and water we can drink and dirt to soil.
Yeah. I mean, the billionaire of the future is somebody who'd be ashamed to be a billionaire. Okay, let's be really clear about that. You know, that's like shameful. Like, oh, you did what?
Good point.
And but the fact is that I mean, it'll happen one way or the other, because basically the climate movement, whatever that amorphously means, but is going to be the biggest movement in the history of humanity. And not because of a leader, not because of a book, not because of any one thing. It's because of weather. I mean, weather's going to change people's understanding and of who they are and what is important and what's not. And so the question is, what will an awakened, maybe not awake, but an alerted humanity, do? What will they organize around? What will they coalesce? And I say that, I have friends, run NGOs and do amazing, amazing work. And sometimes they feel like, well, I'm overworked, I'm underpaid. Are we being effective? Look at the rate at which the world is, degenerating. And I say, yeah, that's all true. But in a way, what you're doing is rehearsing the future for those who figure it out later. And who are they going to turn to? Are they going to turn to Bayer Monsanto when they don't have food? Or are they going to turn to regenerative ag and to smallholders and to people who actually create fertility every single year in farm fertility? I mean, this is obvious. The healthcare system falls apart, which it should, because it's a sick care system gobbling 20% of our GDP. You're not going to go look for more pills. You're not going to go turn to pharma when necessary, of course, but you're not going to turn to pharma to solve metabolic disease caused by ultra-processed food created by big food, which is actually a chemical experiment upon our children and humanity. You're going to start to eat real food that is localized, hopefully that's fresh, that's nutritious, has nutrient density. So all these things are happening, and the choices, are there, and the alternatives are there. It's really a question of when humanity will wake up to it and stop deluding itself that if it makes more money, it's going to solve the problem.
There's the essence of time. And if you say the climate is perfect, it may not be perfect for the human condition.
No.
And is our time and depletion, degradation, degeneration in line with Earth time of, and it's unclear. Are we gonna?
I think it's clear. We're going to collapse at the way we do. Total economic, social collapse. No question about it. But let's talk about that word collapse, because Lila June, who's the Diné and Cherokee woman who's on my board, amazing, amazing woman, poet, activist, singer, scholar. And she describes the way we colonists say, the collapse of the Mayan civilization, the collapse that happened at Chico Canyon, when there was this prolonged mega drought, and what happened to that civilization, or the mound builders. And said from an indigenous point of view, none of those collapsed, none of them. The civilization Chico Canyon became the Pueblo and Diné. In other words, they just changed, and they realized that they had made mistakes civilizationally. The mound builders built it. Why did they build the mounds? So the high priest could get closer to God. Well, how arrogant can you be? And so you're gone next. And same with the Mayans, highly controlling centralized government, right? And so forth. What does that sound like? And you're gone. But the Mayans didn't disappear at all. that so we are going through collapse. We will collapse. Now, collapse sounds like, oh man, that's at the end of everything. No, it's the beginning. It's the beginning. And the same thing we have to see now. Degeneration is the road ends. Regeneration is the beginning. And when do you want to start doing it? When do you want to start learning it? When do you want to start sharing it? When do you want to, involve, engage, your friends, family, networks, in that? Well, today's a good day.
Ah, I love that. Well, everyone, it's a fabulous book. There's so much more in here. We could do 50 of these podcasts to unpack it. And it's inspiring, just great stories, great topics from industry to energy, electrification, even ants. I love learning. And this term ARC, acts of restorative kindness, getting us, our gardens back to wild. But what Paul's helping us do, what others are doing in our new collective, is get back to wildness in ourselves, into spirit, and understanding this is our home. And let's do what Paul says, those things of passion, to steer the ship and start anew and regenerate together. So please get the book. Please put your own creations into our collective and stay the course. Thank you so much, Paul.
Thank you, David. A pleasure to talk to you. Absolutely.
You've been listening to Regen360 with your host, David Gottfried.